Today we got Pirnazar, something like that. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, Jake Pirnazar.
All right, he runs 10.4 in the 100 meter. Is a walk-on at UCLA, and you can find him on TikTok at jake.pirnazar.
Hmm.
All right, let's get right into it. So first, we're going to look over is progressing sprint training throughout the year.
Okay. So, well, I think that the current way that people look at the progression of sprint training throughout a year is all in preparation for the in season, right?
Hmm.
But I'd like to take a slightly different approach when it comes to progressing sprint training throughout a year. And the first thing that I like to highlight is that I think that the off season primarily should be about maximizing structural adaptations within the athlete to then allow for superior outputs when progressing to higher levels of performance in the season. And what I mean by structural adaptations are going to be the adaptations like tendon stiffness, active muscle stiffness, hypertrophy outcomes, so like the addition of myofibrils. And if you can think about it, maybe not strength as a structural change, but strength in the sense that you are improving neuromuscular outputs in lifts, and thus, for example, the way I like to think about it is you're more likely going to be able to produce more force in a sprint if you can squat 300 versus if you can squat 200, right?
Yeah.
And improving your structural outputs in that sense will then allow your sprint training to well, you'll improve your ceiling of performance in sprint training when you are structurally a superior athlete, right? And then I think that in the way I like to structure that, right, is what I'm doing right now is I'm doing more of an eccentric focus in my training, right? The
Hmm.
eccentric overload is going to allow for improvements in tendon stiffness because, as we know, eccentric training is the best way to improve tendon stiffness. We're going to be looking at overall, like eccentric strength is going to help with reducing injury risk because eccentric forces on muscles are going to be higher. Um, but at the same time, the reason I have my eccentric training so early in the off season is because eccentric training in nature is going to be more damaging on your muscles than normal concentric training, for example.
Hmm.
And because we care about our immediate performance less in the early off season, that's why I opt for more eccentric training at this moment in time. And then later, as we progress into the season, it'll be less of a eccentric overload because sprint training is going to be relatively more important during that time. And I don't want my performance to be at such of a detriment due to the damaging nature of the super maximal eccentrics. Um, and then I think another way that I like to progress my training in the gym is going to be more of a, max strength focus to more of a rate of force development and power emphasis. So
Hmm.
if you look at my program right now, right, I'm going to be doing like RDLs at, close proximity to failure, heavy weight. But then, as I get closer to in season, that might be swapped out for something like kettlebell swings, where I'm still training hip extension. It's just more of a power emphasis to it. Um, and then when
Hold on,
it,
let me say. Can I say something real quick?
yeah, yeah.
All right, so when I talk to Athlete X, I've called him like 3 times, and we talked
Mhm.
about like different things. And what I'm doing right now, which like he kind of taught me how to do, was I follow like a short to long program. So
Mhm.
right now I'm doing like sleds, unresisted sprints to like 30 meters, 40 meters, and then I'm gonna slowly develop that to like flying sprints while also keeping acceleration. And then once I start getting to like peaking times, like I don't know, two months before indoor season, I'm gonna start getting more speed endurance at like 100s, 120s, maybe kick it out to like a 200,
Mhm.
and then 90 meters, trying to hammer those in. And then for lifting, I'm gonna get stronger. Obviously, I'm gonna try to implement heavier eccentrics,
Mhm.
and then as I get into closer to season, like what you said, I'm gonna focus on power outputs and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, I think I saw a video of his from like 4-ish months ago or something that you did say what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I think the justification for that was like the idea of specificity and
Hmm.
and also the damaging nature of sprints. And the idea of his was that like as you get closer to in season, you're going to increase the specificity of your sprints by adding like longer distances that are more like the actual race. And yeah, I do think that is a smart way that you can program your training over time. Um, and this is actually like when people message me, right? And they're telling me like, I feel like when I'm getting into my races, I'm not putting things together properly. And
Hmm.
the thing that I tell them is to then do the most specific form of training that there is if you're trying to peak in season. And that's going to be practice running 80-meter sprints from blocks, trying to replicate everything that you're doing in like that you would normally be doing in a race day. So you're not going into that race like completely unprepared. You have that preparation. Um, what was the other element of that question that you were kind of asking?
Like, what do you mean?
With
The
Athlete X, is there anything that you want me to talk about that he does?
um, how do you structure it? Like, do you do a short to long program? Do you do like what do you do?
Um, I wouldn't say that I go
You just kind of
like
eyeball it, kind
yeah,
of.
it's more so like what I think I need at a certain moment in time.
No, yeah,
Oh,
I get that.
yeah. My training is pretty much auto-regulated, and I think he made a video talking about a similar thing where he's like, I kind of just go out how I feel. He's like, I literally think he posted this video like a few days ago or something, maybe even
Hmm.
today, where he's like, I blasted a PR, so I'm gonna take it easy the next few days because I'm a little bit more
No,
fatigued.
yeah, I saw
Yeah.
that.
And I think it's an intelligent way to program training because um, when you are fatigued, your outputs are going to be lower, and
Hmm.
you are more likely than not going to feel that decrease in output. So, the way I implement that in my training is by basically deciding what I'm going to hit on the track. The moment that I get there, deciding how I feel in warm-ups, how I feel in those few reps before that are max effort, and saying, I feel good today. I'm going to really drill in the sprint session. Or, maybe I don't feel as great today. I'm going to give myself more of an easy workout today, so I can smash my next workout in the upcoming days.
Gotcha.
Um, but yeah,
All
that's
right,
what.
so some of the like subtopics to that progressing sprint training throughout the year was what do you think about resisted sprints? How would you
Okay,
implement
I that's smart. Um, I personally do enjoy resisted sprints, and as an athlete who used to suffer from having a bad stride length, I think that doing resisted sprints tremendously helped me improve my stride length because the nature of resisted sprints or are the fact that you have to produce more force because you're overcoming larger moments or larger inertia. And that repetition of, maybe longer ground contact times to the, like, again, the nature of the resisted sprints. But overall, improving force production allowed me to, I think, improve my stride length. So I am a big fan of resisted sprints. I think they can be great for improving stride length and max velocity. But obviously, as everyone knows, they're highly specific to acceleration,
hmm
just because the sprints or the resisted sprints as a whole are going to come with longer ground contacts, which are and higher outputs of force, which are more specific to acceleration. Especially if you're doing with like a sled behind you and you can have the sled keep you at an angle that's more relative to what you would be accelerating at for your torso. And then you can work on the shin angle, striking behind you. So yeah,
What
I do think what?
what weight would you use for a sled? Do you have like a
Oh,
preference?
it would depend on what exactly I'm trying to work on. If it is a max velocity emphasis, I would go a little bit lighter on the sled. Something that maybe only slows you down by like 10 to 20% of your max velocity. And if it was more of an acceleration focus, I would go for much heavier, maybe slowing your velocity down by like even up to like 40% of your maximum velocity. And obviously going with the heavier weight, it has to be shorter distance.
Hmm.
But then with that, I would be emphasizing, hitting proper angles that you would like to see in acceleration. And yeah.
All right, so what I do with my with sleds is I saw Athlete X do this. It's where he starts kind of light and then he does resisted sprints until he hits a certain velocity at like 30 meters. And then once he hits that, the next session he'll up the weight a little bit until he hits that marker again, and then he'll keep
Oh
going
yeah.
that, and then he kind of cuts it off. Like, what do you think about that? Is that a
I
good way to
think
go?
to be honest, I've never seen that video, but or I've never heard of him doing that.
Yeah.
But to be honest, it's something that I've implemented sort of in my own sense in a sort of a different way. Um, because I think that that way of thinking and programming is very similar to like the way you would program progressive overload in like a gym, for example, where let's say you can squat like 300 for 5, and your goal is to hit 300 for 8, and then once you hit it for 8, you up the weight again, and then you work your way back up to that 8 reps. Um,
Hmm.
and similar to this, it's basically you increase the resistance until you hit that velocity again, then you increase the resistance again until you can work your way back up with that velocity. Um, so I do think it's a smart way to implement resisted sprints. Um, my coach, we have the 1080 sprint sometimes.
Okay. Okay.
So something that we'll do sometimes is like compare obviously how I was doing with resistances earlier in the season versus at the end of the season and saying, oh, like trying to match that velocity of what we were doing. So with like the 3 kg, I think earlier in the season I was only hitting like high, maybe mid 8 point something meters a second. But then by the end of the season with 3 kg resistance, I was hitting like 9 point something. And then we were able to track that progression of weight. But then also what that means is with 4 kg, I was hitting the speeds that I was hitting with 3 kg, which indicates that I likely had improvements in my ability to produce force and my velocities.
Okay. So I got you. So there's really no like specific way you go at sledding or using sleds. It can just be like whatever works for you.
I mean, yeah, it's the thing about sprinting is that athletes are going to respond to different stimuli differently. Obviously, like it won't vary too much.
Hmm.
Um, but certain athletes, like for me, for example, I do think that I would respond better to lighter amounts of resistance because I am in nature more of an elastic athlete than I am when it comes to producing high amounts of force. And with the really, really heavy loads, it kind of strips me of my ability to utilize what I'm good at. Um,
Now that makes sense. Yeah.
but yeah, if you're more of a power dominant athlete, then maybe continuing with higher amounts of resistance to accommodate what you're good at might be a smarter option for them.
All right. I think we covered that pretty well. So
Yeah.
we're gonna go to the next subtopic is how do sprint and lift in the same day? And I'm really just want to look at the volume of each session.
Okay. So for me, what I'm doing right now, like what you mentioned, is going to be hitting sprint session usually in the morning ish or the afternoon. Typically when I try to feel my best is when I want to hit my sprint session. Um, but my goal with these sprint sessions usually is to not kill myself, right? I'll maybe do
Yeah.
like realistically, I would hit like like five around five-ish max effort repetitions.
Hmm.
Um, and I would say usually after the 5 rep mark is when I would say, okay, my reps are slower than they were at the start of the session. And
Hmm.
that's why I cut the workout off. Because at that point, it's not really going to be that beneficial for improving speed because you're not recruiting the motor units that you would ideally be recruiting in a sprint when you're fresh. Um, and then I'll usually wait a couple of hours and I'll hit my lifting workout, which I posted my workout on TikTok like a few days ago.
Hmm.
And it consists of about I think 6 exercises. I'll do 1 to 2 sets per exercise and heavy reps or heavy sets. So, for example, I'll start off with a super maximal eccentric Nordic, which I'll hit for around 1 to 2 sets. And usually with my sprints, like yes, the hamstrings obviously do take a pretty big hit in sprints, but I think that especially with Nordics when they're done really heavy and they're only done with 1 to 2 sets, obviously they're going to be damaging, but to be honest, I think that that amount of volume isn't too much to recover from, especially if you're waiting 72 hours between sessions.
Hmm.
Um, In terms of quad stimulus, I'll do some split squats and some jumps. And again, 1 to 2 sets per exercise in the gym. And on top of my sprint volume, that doesn't seem to be too much to recover from, especially if I'm waiting 72 hours. Glutes are going to be hitting the RDLs along with slightly the hamstrings, although they do get a little shut off in the RDL. And again, I don't really think that that volume is too big of a deal to recover from. Um, and my goal, okay, the thing that's important to understand about the off season is that immediate sprint performance isn't going to be as important as it is later in the season,
Yeah.
which obviously I'm aiming to consistently hit high velocities in my off season. But if I'm not hitting those same speeds every single session, maybe I will decrease my volume a little bit, but it's also not something that I'm too worried about because I know that the adaptations that I'm creating in the gym are going to allow for my future work throughout later parts of the season to be more beneficial. Um, so am I hitting everything that you're asking?
I mean, yeah, you're kind of going into like the second section, or like the second section. So like
Yeah.
we're going on that. We could just kind of like go into lifting now. All right. That
Okay.
sound
Okay.
good? All right. So second topic would be progressing lift training throughout the year.
Okay. So, the ways that I would progress lifting throughout the year, which I kind of touched on earlier, are going to be by increasing specificity of the lift. And this could look like increasing the specificity of the joint angle. For
Hmm.
example, a quarter squat would be more specific than a full range of motion
Yeah,
squat.
yeah, yeah.
Um, or you can increase or be more specific with contraction velocity. So shifting from more of a max strength focus to more of a power focus, because obviously lifting is going to be more shifted towards power elements than it is going to be with max strength because of the time constraints. So, and then obviously, like I mentioned earlier, shifting away from, the super maximal eccentrics to then maybe into isometrics more and then more into a concentric focus. Um,
Can I say something real quick? I
yeah.
just don't want to keep cutting you off. But what I talked about with Athlete X and what I do in my own program is I look at TPV a lot.
Uh-huh.
And as I get closer to the season, I drop it lower and lower. So say like in the off season, it's going to be pretty high. It's going to be like 1,000, maybe plus 1,000 plus. And then I start to slowly drop it down, or you can just drop it down fast to like, I don't know, 100 milliseconds and then 150 milliseconds. Or what he talked about was splitting it into 2 days where you do 150 or 100 milliseconds. And then the second day that you go to the gym, not the second day, the next session would be like 300 milliseconds or 350 milliseconds.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like a good way to, or what do you think about that?
I mean, yeah, that is in nature increasing the power of the exercise. The thing about time to peak velocity, is that exercises with shorter TPV or are going to indicate faster contraction velocities, which is going to indicate more rate of force development and power.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have like the technology that allows you to track like bar speed and time to peak velocity,
Mm-hmm.
but just by increasing the specificity of the exercise to more of a power focus, time to peak velocity is going to decrease even if I'm not necessarily tracking it. So like if you're an athlete and you don't have that technology that tracks time to peak velocity, um, just as you progress your lifting throughout the season, you could just move the exercises that you're doing to more of a power focus, and time to peak velocity will drop regardless.
Yeah, I mean, you can honestly like kind of tell just by
Yeah,
looking at how the lift is, by if it's
yeah.
gonna be fast or not. So that makes a difference. All right, we can go into the next subtopic, and that would be plyometrics. And
Hmm.
there's a bunch of stuff I want to look at, but how would you go about it in like lifting?
Okay. So the first thing that I want to say is that plyometrics typically are going to be defined by their utilization of the stretch shortening cycle, but also short ground contact. So just because you're doing a jump, if that jump has ground contacts of half a second, that jump isn't plyometric or a really true plyometric in nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so with plyometrics, right, the thing that they are going to be training is going to be, especially as you get older, because for the younger athletes, this is actually a little bit different. But plyometrics are going to be training muscle stiffness. So what this basically looks like is imagine you have like this is your knee joint, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is when it's extended, this is when it's flexed. Um, this change in joint angle can be accommodated by either the muscle or the tendon. Um, but in fast contraction velocities, ideally you want the tendon to accommodate most of that change in most of relative length, because if the tendon is changing mostly in relative length, that means that you're storing elastic energy. Whereas if the muscle is the thing that's changing in relative length, then the tendon isn't stretching and you aren't storing elastic energy. So what plyometrics do is by training muscle stiffness, they allow the tendon to take up most of the stretching at that joint angle. What this means is that plyometrics are going to allow you to store more elastic energy in your tendons, and they're also going to allow your muscles to remain mostly isometric. And isometric muscles can produce more force than concentric muscles. The thing that's important to understand about plyometrics, though, is that you can only store as much elastic energy through muscle stiffness if your tendons aren't equally as stiff, right? Because what
Mm-hmm.
happens is your tendon stretches, but it can't store all of the energy that is being accommodated during the stretch. What's happening is that in order, as a safety mechanism for your tendon to not rip in half, the tendon is basically losing or dissipating some of that elastic energy as thermal energy in the collagen matrix, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have super compliant tendons or super not stiff tendons, right? You can have all the muscle stiffness in the world, but it's not going to mean anything because all that energy that you're losing from the stretching of you're going to lose all that stretching of the tendon because all that energy is going to be dissipated into the collagen matrix. Um, but same thing goes over the other way around. You can have the stiffest tendons in the world, but if your muscles aren't stiff, that tendon isn't going to be able to be the thing that's being stretched. So the way that I like to look at plyometrics due to this principle is that plyometrics are going to be a supplement to your strength training. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
aren't strong, plyometrics aren't going to do anything. And the analogy that people use is that strength is the engine and plyometrics fine tune that engine. And it's true because if you aren't strong, plyometrics aren't going to do anything for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also with training applications, the first thing that I want to point out is that sprinting is a plyometric, right? So if
Yeah.
you're sprint training 2 to 3 times a week, you aren't going to need to do a whole workout of plyos after that because you've already had such a robust plyometric stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that the majority of your gym training should be focused on getting stronger, and then you can add in a few plyometrics like pogos, are my favorite plyo to add. So you can be taking advantage of the gains in max strength and the gains in plyometric.
And then how would you go at with sets and reps for a
Okay.
plyometric exercise?
Plyos, assuming they are like true plyometrics and short in contact, I think you can usually push them up to 8 to 10 reps. So that's where I put my pogos at. I'll usually put them at 8 to 10 reps.
Okay.
Um, and usually for me, they're going to be 1 to 2 sets ish, depending
Mm-hmm.
on how I'm feeling that day. For me, my performance in pogos is kind of inconsistent. Like some days I feel ridiculously amazing, and I
Mm-hmm.
literally test an RSI of like 3.9, which is like
That's really good. Yeah.
freakishly high, I think. It's pretty
No,
high.
yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah.
And but on other days it just feels like my pogos are like getting me nowhere. So if I'm feeling good, I'll probably add an additional set.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if I'm not feeling good, I'll usually just keep it down to 1 set.
All right. That's what I was going to ask actually about pogos. I was going to ask why you would add higher reps for pogos. Is there like a reason you do that or?
Oh, okay. Well, the reason I do it is because pogos aren't too fatiguing.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I keep my strength training in lower reps is because strength training is fatiguing, really fatiguing actually. And higher reps, as we know, are going to cause ridiculous amounts of muscle damage due to increased calcium ion accumulation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also going to potentially shift your fiber type down due to the increased like AMP activation, calcium ion
Hmm.
dependent pathways. And what was the other thing? Uh, oh yeah, and higher reps as a whole. If you can do an exercise with 10 reps in a squat, for
Hmm.
example, what that means is that motor unit recruitment isn't going to be maximized from the start, most likely. Motor unit recruitment will only be maximized later on in the set when maximum effort is being demanded of you. And the problem with that is our gym training, our goal is to maximize motor unit recruitment throughout everything that we do. And this means that with the higher rep training, we have to consistently reach much closer proximities to failure to get the same stimulus if we were to just do lower reps. So,
Got you.
yeah,
I mean, I hear you talk about it and a lot about low sets when you're like
Mhm.
lifting, and like, why is that? Why do you do low sets when you're like strength training? Because
Like
when I
1 to 2 sets.
yeah.
Okay, okay. So for me, I think that it's it's just that more sets becomes a lot more difficult to recover from.
Hmm.
Um, and when I think about all the exercises that I'm doing, which is going to be 6 exercises in a lifting session, but on top of that, the amount of volume of sprint training that I have, I don't think that I could recover from any more volume or safely or comfortably recover from any more volume than what I'm currently doing. And I would hate to sacrifice an exercise or like remove an exercise out of my program to add more sets to a different one. Um,
Hmm.
I do think that you could potentially push up the amount of sets that you do on an exercise. You just have to make sure that you stay around 4 reps away from failure. Um,
Hmm.
but you're also, I do think that the way I'm doing it right now is I'm probably going to be closer proximity to failure right now with less sets to get more of a hypertrophy outcome. And then as I get later and later into my progression, I'll probably increase the sets but decrease the proximity to failure. So it's more of a strength thing because the hypertrophy outcome probably takes a little bit longer to achieve than the
Hmm.
strength outcome. Um, but that also means it's going to be slightly more of a power focus as well, because I'm probably going to be dropping the weight with that and increasing the decreasing the time to peak velocity.
All right, I got you. All right, second subtopic of this is what is your opinion on Olympic lifts?
Okay, so I don't really do any Olympic lifts, and it's not to say that I think that they're bad. It's just I am not great at them from like
Hmm.
a technical perspective.
Hmm.
Um, the thing with Olympic lifts is that their intention is to improve power output and rate of force development. Um, but to be honest, I think that these like things of rate of force development can be achieved through other metrics. I think that Olympic lifts as a whole are highly fatiguing to
Yeah.
do consistently over time. Um, so with my rate of force development training, I honestly just prefer to do different exercises that I'm good at. Um, I feel like I'm able to take more out of those exercises that I'm good at than have to learn how to do an Olympic lift. And this is not to mention that I had shoulder surgery, so if I were to do
Mm.
anything overhead, that I
Yeah.
wouldn't feel comfortable with that because my shoulder isn't great overhead yet.
Hmm.
And even with hang cleans, for example, I think that I could just get nearly as of a robust stimulus for rate of force development with a different exercise. That's probably less fatiguing. I think that um, the Olympic lifts, specifically like hang cleans and stuff, are probably great options for those who want to improve their vertical jump more so
Hmm.
than sprinting. Because I think that vertical jumping is slightly more specific to the stimulus that you'll get from an Olympic lift versus a sprinting stimulus.
All right, I think that covers that pretty well. All right, third subtopic would be isometrics.
Okay. So isometrics, there's 2 kinds. We're going to be looking at yielding and overcoming. Yielding isos, I think, are they're not too bad. I think in a lot of cases though, it's hard to do a yielding isometric with maximum effort.
Yeah.
Because like if you apply max effort, it wouldn't be an isometric anymore. You'd go past that.
Hmm.
But they could be good for like rehabbing an injured body part
Yeah. That's
or
what I use them for.
reps and stuff. Yeah. Um, Overcoming ISOs, I think, are a fantastic option. I'm probably gonna, as I shift past my eccentric phase, I'm probably gonna start adding more overcoming isometrics into my program. Overcoming ISOs are a great way to improve outputs at a specific joint angle. So what we get out of overcoming ISOs is going to be great specificity at a joint angle that you want to get stronger at. You're going to get adaptations in tendon stiffness due to something called viscoelastic creep, where basically if you hold that angle for a certain amount of time, the what will happen is the tendon is going to lengthen and the muscle will shorten. So you get that tendon stiffness adaptation through that exercise. Um, and overall, like obviously, you're going to have high amounts of motor unit recruitment because you're going to be able to push at max effort. To be honest, they seem great to implement, especially because they're pretty easy to do. There isn't
Yeah.
much of a skill in learning how to do an overcoming ISO because you're just pushing against an immovable object.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think isometrics are a great option for improving joint angle specific training and tendon stiffness.
All right. Fourth thing we need to look at is the long eccentrics or heavy eccentrics, and just that's it, pretty much.
Okay. So, like we've talked about throughout this thing today, heavy eccentrics are going to be probably the most fatiguing type of exercise that you can do, which is why I think that they are most suitable for early season training, because the relative importance of weightlifting goes up and relative importance of sprinting goes down a little bit. But the main thing that I would say these eccentrics are going to be beneficial for is improving tendon stiffness, number one. But it's also important to understand the role of eccentric strength in sprinting, which apart from the injury aspect, where eccentrics will help with decreasing injury risk, what we're going to be looking at is what's actually happening like to the body during sprinting, right? And for example, on ground strike, what happens is when the foot is like hitting the ground, the muscles are actually working eccentrically to like to reduce deformation and like maintain like full body stiffness during the exercise, right?
Hmm.
This deceleration of joints like all across the body is going to be, like I said, largely modulated by eccentric strength. So improving our eccentric strength is going to allow us to like improve our outputs like on initial ground strike to help reduce these joint angle deformations and just improve limb deceleration during different parts of sprinting. Um, so I would say that they are important to add. And like if you look at it, for example, right, football players who tend to be some of the fastest sprinters, like we saw what the guy from Arkansas who ran nine
Oh my
seven.
God, yeah,
It
that's
seems like
crazy.
it truly seems like football players are like dominating the track and field world as of recently. The eccentric forces in football are probably higher than any other sport out there, right? When
Hmm.
you're running, like for example, an out route, you're going up and then you're breaking down as fast as you can and turning out. All that deceleration of your body is a braking impulse caused by eccentric strength. And I don't think it's unfair to say that football players who have probably some of the strongest eccentric strength of every athlete end up being some of the fastest athletes out there. Maybe even because of their large ability to produce high amounts of eccentric forces.
Hmm. I have a question. So
Hmm.
does say you squat, right, and you're just doing a regular squat, and you're just going kind of slow down, or just like normal speed down and then normal speed up, and you're pushing it like a regular strength set. Would that make your eccentric stronger?
Yeah,
Okay.
it
So,
would. Yeah, any like just a normal set of courses is gonna improve your eccentric strength.
mhm,
Um, the thing is you're capable of producing so much more strength eccentrically than concentrically that I think if your goal is to strictly focus on eccentric strength, um, it is important to include some super maximal work because that's the only way that you're going to be able to truly take advantage of like all the eccentric adaptations that you could be making.
All
Although,
right, now,
yeah, it's
no,
not wrong
yeah,
to say like you could get eccentric adaptations from a normal side because you 100% can. Like you 100% can.
yeah, yeah. I didn't get that before, but now it's kind of like, clicking.
Yeah.
All right, so what would be the sets and reps for long eccentrics?
Okay. I like to keep my sets around the same, usually like two-ish.
Hmm.
Um, and in terms of reps, I prefer to go heavy because with super maximal eccentrics, it's probably the most fatiguing work you could do. And high amounts of reps like will probably toast you.
Yeah.
Like if I had to do 10 reps of a super max eccentric Nordic, like I
That,
don't I couldn't. Like I genuinely
yeah.
couldn't. It and it would even if I could, it would cook me for the next like 3 days.
Hmm.
I think it's important to keep reps low on everything, but especially super max eccentrics.
Gotcha. All right, next thing we need to look at is, I think we kind of already went over this, how to lift for strength. And like, I mean, mostly when to stop an exercise. Like, how you talk about sprinting where you sprint and then you kind of stop it when you hit your fastest rep so
Mm-hmm.
you don't elicit more fatigue. Is
Mm-hmm.
that, do you do that in a similar way for strength?
Yeah. So with strength, right? The goal that we're chasing to achieve higher amounts of strength is to achieve higher neuromuscular outputs by improving motor unit recruitment. And so, okay, the two differences that I want to distinguish between hypertrophy training, which is muscle growth training, and strength training is that if your goal is hypertrophy, you need to reach closer proximities to failure. But if your goal is strength training, you can shy a little bit away from failure, train heavier, because this is going to allow you to get more sets done. While the training heavy aspect is going to still allow you to maintain high amounts of neuromuscular output throughout every single set that you do. So with strength training, right? Wait, what exactly was your question again?
How to lift for strength.
Okay, yeah, sorry. How to lift for strength specifically, it's going to be similar to hypertrophy in the sense that you want to stay low reps. Um, but specifically, if you want to just train for strength and not train for hypertrophy, it's going to be slightly more sets with further proximity to failure.
All right. Next thing would be an upper body lift. And the thing I want to look at is how to implement it in a routine and how to structure it.
Okay. So for me, my upper body lifts are like, to be honest, just hypertrophy focused.
Hmm.
So I do just heavy lifting of whatever exercises I prefer doing for my upper body muscles. So what that looks like for me is like a tricep push down, a bicep curl, a pec fly, a lat pull down, a row, some lateral raises. Um, I try to fit that in twice a week. I
Hmm.
usually don't have a problem fitting that in 2 times a week. And I try to fit it in on days where I feel my best. So, for example, if I hit my sprint session and then my lifting day, and I feel completely exhausted, I probably won't hit my upper body workout the next day. I'll just push it back a day, hit upper body on that day. Um, but to be honest, upper body is also pretty low volume comparatively to my sprint session. It's kind of my upper body days are pretty minimalist in terms of what I have to do.
Hmm.
I just deliver a stimulus to my upper body muscles, improve neuromuscular outputs in my upper body, um, and then I call it.
What I usually do is I do a vertical pull, a vertical press, and then same thing, horizontal pull, horizontal press, and then I add accessories in, just something simple like that.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, you don't need too much more, especially if your goal is sprinting, not upper body.
Yeah. All right. The last thing on this topic would be how to structure a lift session, not an
Okay.
upper body, but like a regular lift session.
Okay. So the first thing that I would say is that it is going to be slightly dependent on the athlete, right? As for myself, I am relatively force deficient in comparison to my ability to produce force at higher velocities. So my goal for me right now is to improve my maximum outputs at regardless of contraction velocity because that's relatively what I'm worse at comparing obviously my fast contraction velocity performance. But if you're an athlete who is relatively strong at like things like squat, deadlift, or RDL, but you struggle with producing more amounts of force quickly, then I would say that you should take a slightly different approach to your lifting training. I would say focus more on exercises with fast contraction velocities, rather than slow contraction velocity, so you can improve your rate of force development. Um, overall improve your sprint outputs by, like I said, producing more force quickly rather than improving your max strength, which you're already good at. Um, and then from there, once you kind of have decided what you need to be working on, you can pick your favorite exercises. I honestly think it's important to pick your favorite exercises because if you're not enjoying an exercise, you're not going to be putting your best effort in it. If you're not putting your best effort, you're not going to be recruiting the motor units that you need to elicit the adaptations that you want.
All right. All right. There we go.
Oh, wait,
All
actually,
right.
one more
Well,
thing on that.
okay.
Um, Uh, in terms of picking exercises, though, you need to be picking exercises that train the joint angles that are specific to sprinting. So I think it's crucial that whether you are like, a relatively strong athlete or a relatively weak athlete, you add like things like hip extension into your training. So you get stronger at hip extension because what are you doing when you're sprinting? You're extending your hip into the ground. What are you doing in early acceleration? You are extending your knee and extending your hip to propel yourself forward. So getting stronger at exercises like a squat, even though people say squatting isn't like super specific to sprinting, which like it's really not. If you
Mm-hmm.
get stronger at squatting, you are more likely than not going to improve your ability to produce force while sprinting. So train the major joint actions, train them at contraction velocities that you need to improve at, and that's how I would structure sprinting train or lifting.
All right. The next topic I want to talk about are opinions on tempo.
Okay. This is one thing that I personally feel people tend to get wrong with their early season sprint training, and that's doing like excessive amounts of aerobic training, right?
Mm-hmm.
The point of aerobic work is to improve your ability to tolerate higher amounts of volume. The problem is we don't want the emphasis of our training to be on aerobic work. And you'll see this a lot of times with athletes who think they need to get their endurance better, especially like 400-meter athletes. They're like, if I get my endurance up, then I can run the 400 better. But they just get slower at the 400 because chasing these aerobic adaptations take away from their sprint training. So, in my opinion, tempo work should be maybe done once a week, maybe once every 1 to 2 weeks. I think that a lot of aerobic adaptations, especially if you like have a life, you can like accomplish these things by playing games with your friends or something.
Yeah.
Especially in the early off season when the main goal is to prepare yourself for future training. Um, you can just like play other sports with your friends, take advantage
Mm-hmm.
of aerobic adaptations in that. Um, but the one thing that I really do think that people get wrong is they see the early off season as just training this base of like aerobic capacity, which to be honest, aerobic capacity has never been a limiting factor in anyone's sprinting ability ever because sprinting is anaerobic. Your
Mm-hmm.
ability to utilize oxygen literally will not help you run faster. It will just help you do more workload. Um, I think that even still, right, you don't have to take as extreme a perspective on this. And I don't like the way, honestly, that I worded this earlier, is that people really do see the early off season as a way to prepare themselves for the later season, which I literally just said, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
mad at myself for saying that. You
That's all right.
should be trying to get faster in the off season.
Yeah.
One thing that I think people do is they treat like the first 6 months of the off season like, okay, I'm gonna just do so much volume, so I'm gonna be so ready to drill in my max intensity sprint sessions later. But the thing they don't realize is like they are literally getting slower during that off season. And you'll
Hmm.
see this with so many collegiate athletes who like will not get faster over the course of a season. Like sure they'll get faster from their opener to their last race, but their last race from both seasons is the same. And that's because they spend the whole off season getting slower, um, doing a bunch of aerobic work and ridiculous amounts of volume that they think is going to prepare them for the later season. But they're genuinely just getting slower and
Hmm.
they decrease their volumes and they just get back to where they were before. The off season as a whole, the way I like to quantify is that when you're in season, sprinting is like 99% of importance.
Hmm.
Sprinting is like 1%. When you get to the off season, it's more so sprinting is still 75% importance, maybe 80% importance, and now lifting just is like 20% importance. The goal of the off season should still be to get faster. It's just the added emphasis of lifting is going to allow you to create more structural adaptations to further support your ability to produce or improve your ceiling of performance. Thus, when you actually start reintroducing the key importance of sprinting as like a 99% emphasis.
So is there really like any reason to be doing tempo? Like,
I mean, to be honest, I think yes, a little bit. Um, I feel kind of sore today, and I know I'm not going to be able to drill a max intensity sprint session. So I'm considering right now just going to the track after I film this with you and hitting, a couple 100s at like 80% intensity just because I know I wouldn't be able to kill a max intensity session. Um, so I would just hit something more relaxed today and then get those aerobic adaptations and allow myself to, still stay on the track and stay active. But I don't think that tempo should be that important for most athletes. Most athletes are not being limited by their aerobic capacity. They're being limited by the fact they're just doing too much work.
gotcha. All right. There's a top subtopic of that one, but I'm just gonna cross it out. We can talk about it if we really want to. I was gonna talk about extensive versus intensive tempo, but I
Oh, I
feel like
mean, I feel like we've hit like that idea.
yeah. So I'll just cross it out. All right. The next topic will be how will training change throughout like your career? Like how will you
Okay.
progress it?
So over the course of like, I guess we're talking about years, right?
Hmm.
Um, my training, I imagine will become relatively more and more specific throughout time.
Hmm.
So I'm only a high school athlete, right? Or I just finished.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so my performance and my training is probably going to be much less specific than an athlete who's been training for 10 years. And the way I see myself progressing my training as I continue to get older, will probably be like once I think I reach like a comfortable amount of like true max strength, it will probably become more specific on focusing on specific joint angles in training, more so than just focusing on like just building up my RDL or something. Um, I do think that I'll continue to work on improving tendon stiffness through like max effort eccentrics and stuff. Um, but I do think that, oh, also my volumes will probably continue to decrease the more and more advanced I get, because the thing about adaptations as a whole, right, is sprinting when you continue to develop higher amounts of forces over time becomes more and more fatiguing over time. The more and
Hmm.
more fatiguing it is, obviously, the less work that you can do. Not to mention that on top of that, what are the motor units that we're aiming to achieve with our elite levels of training is going to be the highest of threshold motor units. The motor units that can produce super high amounts of force, but on the downside, these motor units that are also super susceptible to fatigue, right? These motor units um, are so or so susceptible to fatigue that like with the amount of workload that a beginner athlete would be handling, like these motor units would just fully tap out.
Hmm.
Um, it comes down to calcium ions, and when calcium ions accumulate in these sarcoplasm of these muscle cells reach something called excitation contraction coupling failure, which means they can't contract anymore. And as you get more and more advanced and you're activating these fibers that become more and more susceptible to these calcium ions. Um, inevitably, regardless of your ability to recover from higher volumes or what you thought you could recover from, it becomes less and less and less because the fibers you are training are just incapable of handling the workload that the lower threshold fibers were handling.
No, yeah, that makes sense. I hear people talk about it all the time, and it's like they say the more advanced you get, the more volume you got to do. But I think about it, it's like,
It makes no
yeah,
sense.
it doesn't make any
Yeah,
sense because
I
like,
know it bothers me every time that I hear people say that, but like, yeah,
yeah,
totally right. It makes no sense.
yeah. All right, and this is the last topic we're going to talk about. It's the one you suggested was intensity and volume.
Okay. So, the one thing that I don't like people doing in the early off season, and this is kind of something that I do disagree with on Athletex a little bit, um, is that he sees a progression of intensity from like less intense to more intense throughout the course of a season, while keeping volumes the same. I think he said. The problem that I have with this is that you're simply not going to be prepared to sprint with higher intensities if you haven't been doing them for a whole season, right?
Hmm.
Sprinting is the probably the highest output you'll get of any activity ever. You're getting so much output from sprinting, that becomes ridiculously damaging, especially if you haven't done it for a long period of time. And sprinting as a whole, right? These adaptations that you get from sprinting, because they're largely neuromuscular, you don't get really any sprinting adaptations in terms of actually improving your performance if you're doing them at lower intensities. So, like for example, if I were to take an approach right now where I just do a bunch of sub-maximal, like I don't know if you can call sub-maximal sprint. That's kind of like an oxymoron.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But I guess we'll call it sub-maximal sprint work for like 6 months into the off season. It's you're not getting faster. In fact, you're most likely just building poor habits because with sprinting, right? Sprinting is a movement. The brain looks at movement in a very specific sense where coordination is going to be task specific. And if you're consistently putting out lower outputs, the movement is probably different, and you're probably just building on top of poor habits. Um, so I think in the off season, you should be training with high intensity in your sprints, so you can continue to build max velocity adaptations. But then, like I said earlier, you can still focus on the heavy lifting to improve the other adaptations that will allow you to get better at sprinting in the future.
Hmm.
Um, so I do think that, okay, on that intensity should always be high. I think that that is very important.
Hmm.
On the topic of volume, I think that volume in sprinting can increase as you get closer to season, like relatively to the amount that you're lifting. So for example, if you're like, for example, a person might be lifting 3 times a week. I think that you can drop that lifting down to like 2 times a week or maybe like 1.5 times a week, depending on what your training looks like, to accommodate for potentially more allocation of work to sprinting rather than weightlifting. And I would say that, but then at the same time, right, when you're in season, this is when your performance matters the most. So you need to be careful with your sprint volume to make sure that you're consistently recovering from everything that you're doing, especially when you're competing every single weekend or every other
Hmm.
weekend. Um, I think that, okay, relatively in terms of volume, you should be doing less than what you were doing um, in the off season. But as a proportion, more of that volume should be done sprinting than in the gym the later that you get into the season. And then especially as you reach the like peaking parts of the season where you need to like qualify for like a race, like it's like your last chance to run.
Hmm.
Realistically, that's when you should be running like literally maybe training like 1 time a week, and then your next training session that week would be like a race. Um, so you're keeping volume at an all-time low, making sure that every single rep that you do is quality. So you can chase the neuromuscular outputs that are going to allow you to PR, and hopefully qualify for like the subsequent races. Um,
On the topic of volume,
mhm.
so this winter I injured my back. I had like disc problem and a bunch of
Mhm.
mechanical stress in my spine, and I couldn't really do any training for a while. And then I had 2 months to train for the
Mhm.
upcoming season. And I have the Simply Faster, whatever, I forget what it's called, but it's a timing system.
Mhm.
And I would go on the track, like say like Monday, right? I would hit a super intense sprint session, say like it's just 300s. I just do like 300s. I'd peak up my third rep was my peak. I would cut it there and I'd go home, and the next day I'd go to the gym and then do like a couple exercises just really quick, trying to accelerate the bar as fast as possible. And then I'd rest for like 2 or 3 days. And I'd come back and do another sprint session, and my times would be dropping by like
Mhm.
half a second. And I kept
Gee,
doing that. I kept doing that. And I dropped my time by like a second and a half after those 2 months into
that's
training. And
crazy.
it was, I get how I feel like the volume and rest is like
Very.
very underlooked. And
I completely agree. And I was honestly, bro, I was in a similar situation to you because in August I had shoulder surgery and I literally couldn't jump or do anything because any reverberation of movement would be like horrible pain on my shoulder. Um, so yeah, I literally similar as I think you came into like the season with very little preparation because I
mm-hmm,
hadn't trained at all. Um, and even still, I was able to drop my time from 10:9 to 10:4 because consistently, or the way I like to think about it, right, is I hit a high intensity session, I rest, I hit another high intensity session, and I think it's if I'm fully recovering and I'm hitting these high intensity sessions with high levels of intent, it is inevitable that I'm going to get faster because the only thing that could prevent me from getting faster would be fatigue, but I'm not
mm-hmm,
fatigued. So the stimulus should undoubtedly be making me faster because like I'm just delivering a stimulus and consistently training fully rested. Like it seems impossible that that method of training wouldn't lead to an individual getting faster.
mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And
So
I feel like that's like the most specific you can get
yeah.
sprint training wise. Just resting and then
Yeah.
going blasting out as fast as you can.
Yeah. And
So,
like it seems so simple. And I completely agree with you. It's so specific, it's so simple, and is most likely because of that going to yield such amazing outcomes
mm-hmm,
because every time you perform, you're just going to be getting better.
mm-hmm.
It's like
And
chasing progressive overload in the gym. You're just freaking getting better.
yeah,
So
and my coaches like I didn't get much faster from the season before, but taking
mhm.
in where I couldn't sprint for like 5 months and driving my times by that much, I told my coaches about it, and they were blown away by how just like simple it was. Like you
Yeah.
just go out there. I feel like training, especially like for sprinting, is just the more simple you do it, the better results you're gonna get,
Yeah.
and just like
100%.
that way.
Completely agree with you.
All right, well, I think that'll be
That's good.
everything we covered, and we'll be good. All right,
Sounds good, man.
thank you, man.
Thank you for having me on here, dude. I'll catch you later.
Got you. Catch you later, man.